So go ahead and get started. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are brand new to E-rate, have never done it? Wow, that's good. Having seen that in the audience, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on what E-rate used to be. That's useless information to you. I am going to spend a lot more time on what E-rate is now. I will highlight some of the changes for those who have been around E-rate for a while, because we've had significant changes in the last year, and I need to highlight a few things just so that people remember what those changes were. As you can see, we have quite a full agenda today. What is E-rate? What's new to E-rate? We're just going to highlight that real quickly in the beginning for those of you who have been around E-rate for a little bit. We'll talk about one of the biggest changes this year, which is the E-rate Productivity Center. Eligible entities, discount calculations, eligible services, and the Category 2 budget, CIPA compliance, the entire cycle of E-rate, at least through the funding commitment decision letter process, document retention and program compliance, and then we'll just touch real briefly on the California Teleconnect Fund. For the local audience, if you need the wireless network, it's the public network, and there's no password required. The purpose of today's training is to give you at least a head start into your E-rate application. What you'll see on the slides today is what we consider to be best practices. However, if you need source documents, you have to go back to USAC's website. USAC is the administrator of the program. Those are the documents that are going to help you get through any audit or appeal. The slides we're presenting to you today is, like I said, it's hopefully a head start for you in your application process. So exactly what is E-rate? It's one of 4 programs that's managed by the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and actually administered by USAC, which is underneath the FCC, the Universal Service Administrative Company. It's designed to provide discounts between 20 and 90% on eligible services, telecommunications, internet access, and internal connections. You think 20 to 90%, that's kind of a broad number, so where do I fall within there? We'll talk about that in detail as we go through the presentation. It has an annual funding cap of $3.9 billion. That is to service schools and libraries. It requires an annual application process and is funded by a surcharge on phone bills. And guess who pays that surcharge? We do. I opened up my wireless phone bill, and I just copied this. It's from my wireless bill, that universal service charge. That's what funds the E-rate program, as well as the 3 other programs underneath Universal Service Administrative Company. So what's new to E-rate? Actually, quite a bit. We're going to just quickly review some of the changes. Now, this doesn't by any means represent all of the changes, but some of the major ones. We see E-rate of old listed on the left, E-rate of new listed on the right. The old E-rate had a discount percentage for each single site in the district or in the library system. New E-rate has 1 discount percent for the entire district. Doesn't matter what site you're at. You, in the past, were a high discount, and you had other low discounts, it doesn't matter. You get 1 average discount for the district. In the past, voice and VoIP services were fully eligible, but now they're being phased out. In 2019, you will get no discounts by that time. Some of you probably won't get discounts this year, and it all depends on where you started with your current discount percentage. In the past, data plans were fully eligible. Now data plans are under high scrutiny. The reason being is USAC and the FCC are considering this possibly as a duplicative service. Duplicative services were never eligible. So now they're looking at this thinking, okay, is a data plan actually the most cost-effective way to get internet access to your students? It could perhaps be the most expensive way when you compare it to building your own wireless network. So there's a very high benchmark for getting approval for data plans under the E-rate program. Another thing that's changed that affects your discount percentage is the urban and rural status. It has forever been based on the 2000 census data. It's now been updated based on the 2010. And with population growth, that means a lot more places are considered urban than they used to be. What this means, there's a difference in calculation for the rural districts. Rural districts often get a bump in their increase. We'll talk about that more when we get to the discount percent section. But that's something that you need to be aware of. Simple change. We're all used to priority 1, priority 2, right? Now category 1 and category 2. Web hosting and email service, simply not eligible anymore.
On the first line there,
so the question comes to consortium and their discount. The way the consortium works is they take the simple average of their member districts. If it's a state consortium, a little bit different. I'm not going to really talk much about state consortiums today, but a general consortium is the simple average of your member districts. So some good changes that we've seen. In the past, we had a funding cap of $2.4 billion. Thanks to the modernization order, we got an additional $1.5 billion added, so we're at a cap of $3.9 billion per year, plus inflation. Also in the past, I think most of us suffered this one. I think that's a proper term. Priority 2 was only funded if there was enough money left over after priority 1 was funded. And we know under that arrangement for the past 2 years, there was no money left over, so nobody got priority 2 funds. Thus, one of the changes to the program, eliminating some services and changing that it's now category 1 and category 2, they each have their dedicated budget. Category 2 actually has a dedicated budget of $1 billion a year. The FCC has set that aside for the next 5 years, and that is not part of the $3.9 billion cap. It doesn't mean that we have a $4.9 billion total cap. That just means the FCC has designated $1 billion for the next 5 years to fund category 2. Major change that we're going to dive into in just a moment. The online E-rate Productivity Center. In the past, you had the option to file your forms via paper, online. You can mail them in, fax them in, email them in. That's all changing with the E-rate Productivity Center. As of this year, you do not have the option to file your Form 470 on paper at all. It has to go through the E-rate Productivity Center, which is the reason you all got the email. Please be sure you have your account set up. The same is true with your Form 471 this year. There will be no option for a paper form. A lot of this has to do with data transparency. So in order to get data that's available to everyone that makes sense, you've got to have parameters, and everyone's got to fit into that shoebox. Sometimes it's a hard fit, but that's the only way to get clean data. So let's just kind of take a walk through the E-rate Productivity Center. This is something you're all going to have to get used to in the coming weeks. I left the USAC logo on these slides simply because this is their vision of what the Productivity Center is going to do for us. And I thought it'd be best coming from the horse's mouth here. The reason to move to the portal, it provides a single location for all of your activities. Eventually, it will have all of your history in it. They're not uploading history from the past, but starting with 2016-17 funding year, all of your history will start accumulating in that portal. Your PIA responses, questions and responses, will go through the portal. So instead of you tracking, where's that email? It's in one location. It's going to be in your news feed or in your notices, right there in the portal. It allows you to ask questions to USAC and get your documented answers. Again, it's in your portal. If you move on from your district, your portal stays there. So the next person who logs in as the account administrator has your history. Their goal is to improve the customer experience and to streamline the application process. So you think about what it means to streamline the process. How many of you are used to waiting months and months and months and months before you got your funding commitment decision letter? The new goal of the program, the FCC has set a deadline of September 1st to have all workable applications funded. Well, in order to help accomplish that goal, streamlining the process, making sure the data that gets entered into the form is data that they can evaluate quickly, that's part of the new online portal. We mentioned how easy it is to access the forms in the portal. Again, I'm going to mention that this is their goal for the portal. Once we step into it, you'll see it's a work in progress. I'm just going to give you a heads up. It is a little awkward right now, but we have to get used to it because that's what our funding relies on. One nice thing is it can be accessed from any electronic device. I tried it on my iPhone, it works great. Tried it on a Samsung tablet, works great. Laptop, desktop. You just log in with your user ID and password and you're into your portal. You can sign forms, you can build forms, you can send notices. It's accessible to you wherever you are. You also, within that portal, have the ability now to update your own information. If your address changed, if your phone number changed, if your student population count changed, you can update all of that within the portal, and then it just simply uploads into the form. You don't have to manually enter it into each form. You don't have to tell it to copy from a previous form. It just simply loads. Consortia will have an easy access list to all of their member districts. If you're missing anybody, you can easily see it. You can add your members to your list. Keep in mind, just you can add them, they can remove you. So you have to have that communication going so you don't end up missing somebody. You no longer need to keep track of those PIN numbers. The little card that you got mailed to you and you hand it to that person to track it for you and then you couldn't find it when you needed it. Instead, you have your own username and password. Your password is required to be changed every 60 days. Does that mean you're going to have sticky notes everywhere? However you manage your password is up to you. But their system is based on federal standards, and in spite of how much pushback they've gotten from everybody that a 60-day change is a little much, they're helpless to change it. Your portal starts with your account administrator. Your account administrator is automatically designated as the last person to sign your Form 471. Now, in most cases, that's probably the person who knows the least about E-rate in your district. Perhaps your superintendent who only sees it when he has to sign the form or enter his PIN. If that's the case with you and there really is a better person who should be actually managing the system, we'll talk about how you can get that changed because your portal is going to be important. Now, once you're in the system, let's say you got your superintendent to set it up, he can reassign the account administrator to whoever he wants, and he can still be the signer. So there are rights, user rights within the system that can be assigned, and it can be assigned to multiple people. Keep in mind, consultants cannot be assigned the right to certify your form. They can build them, they can send them to you to approve, but they cannot actually submit and certify the form. Now, the different types of organizations that will get an account: independent schools and independent libraries, a school district, library system, and consortia. The ones that will not get an account is if you happen to be a single school site and you always filed as a school instead of a district. The reason is they've created their parent-child relationship, and only the parent can file forms. The parent is considered the district. So you may just simply need to ask to be redesignated as a district instead of a school. Now the process, real quick, I'm hoping that most of you have already seen this, or at least your account's been set up, even if you may not have seen this back end part. In order to get your account set up, you will receive an email invitation should you happen to be the account administrator from USAC. Then you'll navigate to the portal, portal.usac.org. For the very first time that you go there, you'll enter your username, which is always going to be your full email address. Enter your username and click Forgot Password. You will then be sent an email with a link to reset your password. That link is only valid for 15 minutes. Now, we have heard of instances where your IT department has it set up for every 30 minutes you get emails instead of constantly. If you happen to be in a situation like that, you're going to have to find a workaround. You'll have to talk to your IT department because USAC has not been able to or willing to, whichever the case may be, change this 15-minute period. If you don't get it done within the 15 minutes, you simply start over. But once you get your password reset, then you finish the login process, you will accept the conditions, use the terms and conditions of logging in, and you're ready to go. So let's take just a minute now and get a visual of what this portal actually looks like. If you just simply navigate to portal.usac.org, this is the first screen you get. You will always need to acknowledge this every time you log in. And I'm going to log in as an account administrator so you can see what it looks like. Once you log in, the first thing you're going to come to is my landing page. On the landing page are your entities, parent and child. Parent is always going to be the one on top, and your child entities underneath. Now, one of the things that you have to look for within the system, because, like I said, it's a little bit awkward at the moment. I know my organization has about 15 sites, and I've got 4 listed here. So that means you need to start a case, kind of like the old Client Service Bureau. Within this system, you'll start a case and say, hey, I need to have these entities added, connected to my parent. They're still building this system. The system is not done. It's still building. So this is something you'll have to do before filing your Form 471. And I encourage you all to start on that now, because you think about nationwide, as every district is starting to do this, USAC is going to get flooded with requests, so it's just going to slow down their response time. So the sooner you get started, the sooner it can get corrected, and you can move on with preparing to file your 470 and your 471. As we scroll down this landing page even further, you'll see My Tasks. This is telling me that I've started a Form 470, but I haven't posted it yet, because it's sitting in my task list instead of down below in my forms. My forms, it tells me it's incomplete. At this point, nobody in the rest of the world can see it, only people within my own organization. And when I said that history will eventually be provided, they're building that in there, the drop-down menu for the year. Some good things that they've done in this system, the application number actually now has a pattern to it. The first 2 digits is the funding year. So now you can actually look at your number and have a clue what it's talking about. The first 2 numbers is your funding year. The next 2 numbers, I believe it's the next 1 number represents the form. So Form 470, Form 486 would be the next one, Form 471. And they've added other information to that scheme that would help us figure out what that form number means without having to dig further. What's my form name? What year was this? So there are some good things that's part of the system. In the end, it's going to be a great use to all of us. That's as far as we're going to look right now. Later, as we go through this, then we'll walk through the 470 a little bit further. And I'll show you some of the fitting that shoe into the size that may or may not fit properly. But just taking a quick glance at the portal, if you have any questions, remember we'll walk through a little bit more in detail later. Question is, how long will it take to add the entities? I'm hearing turnaround times of anywhere from 1 day to 5 days at this point. Question? Okay, so you do have the option to edit the entity's name. The best practice would be to make that entity name match the CDF database. So for the California School Directory, once it matches you'll have, those are the kind of cleanup things that's going to aid in your application review. So we encourage you, go ahead and modify your entity name to make it match your CDF database.
That was my question. They're not pulling that name from the database.
No, the question is, are they pulling that name from the CDF database? They are not. They have their own database. And that database was created by way back when. I'm not sure where they started from, but then each of us adding our own entity as time comes. And I know that personally I had scenarios when I requested an entity to be added, and they would abbreviate the name because they didn't want it so long. So it would never have matched the CDF database. But now we have the opportunity to correct those things. And within that same area that you were mentioning of changing the name is you have the opportunity to put in your CDF code. When you put that code in, put it as one long number, no spaces, no hyphens, just one nice long number.
Hi, this is Carol from San Mateo.
Hi, Carol.
Hi. It's just a logistical question. Are you showing in slides? We're not, all we're seeing are different, screens of the attendees.
I am showing the slides. I'll have to ask for some help on why you're not seeing them. You should be seeing my screen.
All right.
So I'll get some help, and when it comes in, I'll have to probably ask you to communicate with him.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see if we have any questions on the web. Okay. At this point, we'll move on. Now we're going to start diving a little bit more into the meat and potatoes of the whole E-rate program. Eligible entities. So now we know what E-rate is. It's a funding source. But who gets to tap into that funding source? It's specifically for schools and libraries. And the rule definition is you have to be a school as defined by the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. In California, that would be your elementary, secondary. ESAs, that's what E-rate calls it. County Office of Education, that's what California calls it. Your charter schools and religious schools, both public and private. These all qualify. These are the standard ones across the nation. Now what gets interesting is each state then defines what they call a school. And California gets to benefit by their own definition because it allows the pre-K, Head Start, juvenile justice, and adult ed to qualify. Now you'll notice it says adult ed cannot include education beyond grade 12. What exactly does that mean? Adult ed is supposed to get your GED, right? Well, a lot of adult ed sites are now giving work experience type classes, or they're giving providing college classes through their their adult ed program. So if that's being done, you just have to figure out how much of the curriculum includes that and cost allocate out that difference. Schools operating as a for-profit or that have endowments exceeding $60 million do not qualify for E-rate. Now, in the E-rate program, those of you who have been around for a while, there's always tweaks going to the program. In the past, little, sometimes a little bit bigger. Last year, huge. Well, in 2011, there was a little tweak that allowed some of the school residential facilities to qualify for E-rate. Schools on tribal lands, schools serving the handicap or the behavioral disabilities, as it states here, schools serving children with medical needs, juvenile justice. These are ones you would expect that their students would be staying overnight. They have a residential facility, and because of that, those sites are now eligible for E-rate. Well, one of the things that can help you in establishing your eligibility is, do you have a CDF code? You can check that out on the California School Directory. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. If you don't have a CDF code and you think you need one, we've provided a guidance on that on slide 23 as well. This code in itself is going to aid you in a more efficient review process to speed up that time it takes you to get your funding commitment decision letter. But let's just quickly take a look at that California School Directory. The link takes us straight to the directory, and you have a lot of search parameters in here. I'm just simply going to type in part of the name of the organization that I'm responsible for E-rate on. And here we have a few different things listed. We have Butte County Office of Ed listed as the district, but let's take a look at one of these sites, Butte County Special Ed. As we look at this, here is your CDF code. You just simply copy and paste that into your profile on your EPIC portal. It will always stay there. You don't have to update it unless it changes, which it shouldn't. It's there. As you scroll down, you'll get a little bit more information. We'll come back to this school directory a little bit later because it's a useful tool to use through the CIA process. Just going to check and make sure we have sound going out. Okay, I'll come back to any questions right at the end of this section. Libraries that qualify. Do we have any libraries in the audience? Nice. Libraries must meet the definition of a library or library consortium based on the 1996 Library Services and Technology Act. And you have to be eligible for assistance from a state library administrative agency and act as a nonprofit and traditional library. What does that mean? Well, in the school world, most school sites have a library. So do they qualify separately? No, they qualify with that school site. The libraries that's being spoken of here are absolutely independent and separate from any school library. It'd be a public library, an academic library, research library, a private library if the state so defines them and recognizes them as a library. So once you realize that you qualify for E-rate, your entities qualify, then each entity will need its own identifying number within the E-rate system. The billed entity is assigned to the parent organization, such as a district or a library branch. Underneath that, you have an entity number. That would be your child site, your school site, your individual library site. If you find yourself that you're building a new school and you need a new entity number, contact the Client Service Bureau and request an entity number. They will ask you for some identifying information such as the site name, address, county, and then they will create that entity number for you and associate it with your parent entity number. So regarding eligibility, who qualifies for E-rate, do we have any questions locally? Questions?
You know if any number is no.
The question is, does USAC plan on moving the entity process, getting a new entity number to the online system? From what has been shared with us, they plan on moving everything into the online system. So that would include being able to request entity numbers. I did have a question online regarding entities as well. Question is, can I have multiple schools with the same CDS code, such as a single charter with multiple facilities? The answer to that is yes, that is a scenario that exists. It does make it challenging for charter schools in getting their entities validated because those satellite locations, not only do they move often sometimes, but there's nothing behind them, meaning there's no CDS code to that address. So it does make it a challenge sometimes for charter schools that are in that position that have one CDS code and multiple sites. But, the question is, could that be where the NCS code comes in? I'm going to ask a colleague in the audience that might know a little bit more about NCS codes. Do you know how they're associated? Okay. NCS codes is not, they're national codes. They're not assigned by California. California has no mandate over them. So I'm not sure that each charter school gets one. I don't know exactly. I don't know if it's just the lead agency or if it's each site. But if it is each site, that might be something useful to the charter schools. Okay, do we have any questions at our remote sites regarding eligible entities? Okay.
So where in Epic do you actually put the CDS code in?
How about we just go back and take a look at that? So here we are in Epic. And I'm going to ask, can you guys see that on the far side on the video conference site? Can you see my screen?
Yes. No.
Okay, the site that can't see it, you may need to ask your IT staff on site to change your view.
Okay.
So once you're in Epic, and on the landing page, just click on one of your sites. Let's click on Table Mountain. And as soon as we click on that, here we have all of the information on this particular site. And here we have the NCES Private School ID, which is not populated. It gives a little bit of information like its enrollment based on the last application cycle. Once we go up, scroll up a little bit more. Okay, now I've got to remember, I'm still learning this as well. Click on Manage Organization. And this takes us into the actual screen where we can edit the information. So if I click in here, I can actually edit the name. Scroll down a little further. FCC registration number. And the actual field I'm looking for, I'm not finding at the moment. So I'm going to go back to the Butte, the parent entity. To go back from here, good news is you can click the back arrow. I know the old system, don't click the back arrow. The new system, it works just fine. So we're going to go back one more. Let's click on Butte County Office of Ed. And this one has a lot more options at the top. So let's click on Manage Organization from the ellipsis screen, or ellipsis bar. Scroll down. And there we have the state school code or state LEA code. We're requesting that you put everything into the state school code field. That way we can have a little bit more continuity. Yeah. So we have somebody on the video conference side that is not on mute. I request that you all check that and make sure you're on mute, please. Thank you.
Format
It is. You'll notice there's going to be a few things in the system that you're going, why did they do that? USAC is actually working on an ongoing list of improvements. Some of the improvements will be implemented, thank goodness, and some of them, they're working this for 50 states. So they're trying to find a platform that, what's the most common denominator for all 50. But for the state of California, when you download the whole report, it's going to be easier if we have that entire code in one field. So whichever one you choose to put it in, just put the entire code in one field. So now that I've brought this gentleman into the presentation, I'll introduce, this is Jeff Fellow from the county, or from the California Department of Education. So.
I'm saying, cut and paste your whole number in one or the other. Don't take out the data or take out the.
Correct. Cut and paste the entire number into one field or the other with no spaces.
Now, it just is kind of clarified it. Part of it, like, crazy. There's about 11,000 schools in California, like, that have a CTF code, about 11,000. When you look at how many schools have numbers we're just talking about, numbers there are. So obviously, you've got $14,000. No.
Okay, so we're going to kind of hit the EPIC portal throughout our presentation today. So hopefully by the end, you're at least familiar with the look of it. At some point later this afternoon, we're going to go over their menus. As much as they're not exactly intuitive, at least they're consistent, so you can get used to it. At this point, let's go ahead and talk about discount calculations. Now that we know you're eligible, how much do you get? It's based on two things: your NSLP eligibility, how many of your students qualify for the National School Lunch Program. They don't have to use it, they just have to qualify for it. It's calculated for the organization as a whole, and library systems would use the NSLP eligibility of the district where the main branch is located, because obviously they don't have a student population. Consortium would use the simple average of all their member districts. Now here's a change for consortium. In the past, you had to actually enter all that information on your 471. Now what's going to happen is, because each district is entering their own information into their own portal and profile, it will automatically upload into your file, into your application. Question is, each district will have its own administrator account. Yes, that is correct. How do you get that district onto your consortium? We'll walk through that a little bit later on managing entities. It's actually quite a simple process. You'll be happy to see it. Now, adding them into your consortium online in the portal does not replace the need for a letter of agency to be on file. The second thing that determines your discount percentage is your urban or rural status. We talked earlier about that being updated to the 2010 census data. So now, in order for you to get a rural discount rate, you have to have the majority of your entities classified as rural. If you are a district that has a total of 6 sites and 3 are urban and 3 are rural, you're an urban district. You have to have the majority rural in order to get a rural discount percentage. Now here's the official grid, the discount matrix. You'll notice that it's all weighted in the sense that on the left side, it says if you have less than 1% of your students that qualify for the NSLP program and you are an urban district, you get 20% E-rate discount. If you're a rural district, 25%. Now that 5% bump actually goes to a 10% bump in the next couple of discount levels. It evens out where it doesn't matter if you're rural or urban once you get to the last 2 tiers, where if you have at least 50% of your students that qualify for the NSLP program, then you're looking at an 80% discount across the board, regardless of urban or rural. But here's another change to the program. In the past, we had 1 set of discount percentages. Now we have 2, 1 for Category 1 and 1 for Category 2. Category 2's highest discount percentage is 85%. That's a significant change from years past. Again, another modification with the hopes of spreading that money to everyone. So far, it's worked. The first year of Category 2, guess what? There's enough money to fund every single application. Haven't seen that in how many years? So far, something in the system's working. Now, we still have non-instructional facilities, and we keep talking about student populations and how that is, that's how a site adds to the district's discount percentage. Non-instructional facilities do not have a student population. They simply do not influence the discount percentage. They don't have a discount percent of their own.
I've never had to conduit and pull in from the street. My first experience with it.
Hi, we're enjoying your conduit conversation, but I don't think you realize you're not on mute.
Internal wiring, maybe is something out in
San Mateo, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
You are not on mute, although it was a great conversation about conduit.
I apologize.
That's okay. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to wait till my screen's, there we go. So it's non-instructional facilities, they just simply don't influence the discount percentage. They don't get a urban rural status, and they don't have a student population. Even if they used to be the old non-instructional facility with a classroom, those students are enrolled at a site somewhere. That site gets credit for those students, not the non-instructional facility. So when it comes to calculating your discounts, you're looking for those that qualify for the NSLP program. You can have lots of options in figuring out who that is, but each option you choose will have a direct impact on how quickly or slowly you get funded. The best recommended option for those of you who report into the CalPADS system, which I believe is most of you, CalPADS 1.17 report for the October 2015 filing period. That is going to be the most advantageous for you, and there's a few reasons for that. Question? The question is, will USAC take that report as evidence in a PIA? The short answer is yes. The long answer will come this afternoon when we talk about PIA. It's yes with caveats behind it. There's a very few things in E-rate that are black and white. But where do you get this report? Each site has a CalPADS coordinator, and that person can pull this report for you. It is the most efficient way to get through the application review process, because this report generates what's called a state valid file. State of California sends a state valid file for every school district in California to USAC, and USAC compares that to the numbers that you have put on your application. If those match, boom, you should not receive questions about your discount percentage. I say you should not receive. The reviewers can do what the reviewers want to. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the review process. This report should be final, complete, by December 19th, which is actually pretty good timing considering we're not expecting the Form 471 to open until mid-January. So once you get that report from your CalPADS coordinator, you can go ahead and update your profile in Epic. You're done. If you don't know who your CalPADS coordinator is, when we looked at our CDS database and we pulled up Butte County and each Butte County Office of Ed, you scroll all the way to the bottom, it tells you who your CalPADS coordinator is. As long as that information is up to date, you're good to go. If it's not up to date, you might want to bring it to somebody's attention. So CalPADS 1.17, the most efficient way to go. But just like in most programs, it's not every site can actually benefit from the CalPADS report. I'll give you an example. A preschool. They may or may not report into CalPADS. If they do, sometimes they'll report in as one big group and they actually have 4 different sites. Different things like that. So it may not be the most advantageous way to go for a preschool. So there's options. And these options are provided by USAC. One of the most efficient options is the survey. Providing a survey to your students allows you to collect that same information as what is collected through your NSLP application process. And as a matter of fact, because of the change to the way surveys are calculated, you can now use the NSLP application as your survey tool. You don't really have to change very much on your side if you're already collecting that data anyway. But if you choose to build your own form, it has to contain the family name, student name, size of the family, and the income level. Now granted, how much of that information is confidential? So if you're asked for it, you redact the student's name. The family name has to stay on there to show that it's a legitimate form, size of family, income name, and income level. But you just remove the student's name. The reason this is the second most efficient is because you provide all of the backup documentation. You don't have to seek third-party validation on a survey. And as many of you who have been involved in the system for a while, third-party validation can slow your PIA review down. But when you can provide your own backup, it speeds things up. Question is, can you use only one method or the other? Per site, you can use a variety of methods. It's correct, it's per site. And then what happens is when you put in your information into your portal per site, it automatically calculates your organization-wide discount. I'm sorry, can you rephrase? Okay, non-public schools, do they report to CalPADS? Okay. I would check with your administration and dig a little bit deeper. If you have the option to use CalPADS, it will be the most efficient. If you end up that you're one of the schools that don't report into CalPADS at all, then a survey is definitely going to be your friend. A little bit more information on how that survey works. You would send it out to all students. It doesn't necessarily have to be like one blast of mail to go out. It can be handed out in the registration packet so that you know every new student gets a survey. You collect all of that information over a period of time. It doesn't matter how many you sent out, it only matters how many came back. Because you take that and you compare it against your total population to get your percentage of how many actually qualify. So from that survey going out, you'd want to compile a report because you've got to prove this data. It should contain the number of students enrolled and the number of students that qualify for the NSLP program based on those survey results. Here's an example of what it could look like. Let's say you have 2 schools in your system, enrollment of 300 and 900 respectively, and of the surveys that came back, 100 of them qualified from the red elementary school, and 550 of them qualified from the blue high school. That gives you a total of 54% of your enrollment that qualified for the NSLP program. Take that and go back to the discount matrix. 54% lands here in that 50 to 74%. So across the board, you're an 80% discount or district. That's what you would get. Other options. Again, survey is not the only option. Financial aid form. If you happen to be a school site that's tuition based, you can use your financial aid forms as that survey tool. A few caveats: all students must have equal access to that form, and the applicants are required to submit federal tax forms to document their income. So those are just in addition to the rules that apply to a survey. This would also be included for the financial aid form. The CEP program, it's relatively new to California. It's been in existence for a couple of years now, but basically your 40% or more of your students are directly certified. This program allows all students at the school site to eat free, even though they don't all qualify for the NSLP program. The way that affects E-rate is you take your identified student percentage and you multiply it by the current national multiplier of 1.6 to determine your eligibility for E-rate. How many of you think you might be in a CEP school? Okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. If there's anyone on the web or in our video conference audience who has questions on CEP, please feel free to email me directly, and I'll do my best to help you out. The same is true with provisions 1, 2, and 3. Similar program to CEP in the sense that you're talking about a group of students who help the entire school qualify for getting the free and reduced price meals. With CEP and provisions 1, 2, and 3, you qualify for multiple years at a time. Unlike the straight CalPADs, that changes from year to year. These help you qualify for multiple years at a time. Head Start program, that's an interesting animal within the E-rate system. The reason is because in order to qualify to go to Head Start, their qualifications for income level are actually stricter than the National School Lunch Program, which makes them automatically a 90% site. But what's interesting about them is you have to consider that their early Head Start, which is children under the age of 3, do not qualify for E-rate. So if you happen to have a Head Start facility that contains both Head Start and early Head Start, you'll have to calculate how many of those are early Head Start and cost allocate out what that percentage is in order to remain E-rate compliant. The question is, changes not included. It depends on how the facility is set up. The reason being, if you have one classroom that contains both, then part of the services being delivered to that classroom are being enjoyed by those who don't qualify. If you have a school site and you can definitely show that, well, this early Head Start program pays for theirs and then we pay for ours over here, that's a different scenario. So it really depends on how you're set up. Now, we mentioned this a little bit already. The old system of E-rate required you to actually manually enter your NSLP data for each site at least one time, and then you could copy it from form to form. One time each year, I should say. But in the new system, you can update your profile right now. You don't have to wait for the 471 to be available, for the window to be open. You can update this information as soon as you have it available, and it simply automatically populates your Form 471 as soon as it becomes available. So on actually calculating your discounts, the different methods that are available to you, do you have any additional questions that we haven't already considered? Question from libraries. So the question is, if for a library that doesn't have a main branch, How do they determine their discount percentage? So you would take where that library resides. What if you have 7 of them? I'm going to get back to you on that. Perhaps I can ask you to email that one to me, because I'm going to have some additional questions for you. Are there still deadlines for the forms to be submitted? Is that your question? Okay, so to clarify that just a little bit, in talking about the discount percentage, you're not limited to updating that information to only when the 471 form becomes available. You can update that information now. Once the 471 becomes available, that information strictly on the discount calculation automatically populates your 471. You still have to go in and select your service providers and your services and all of your funding requests, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but there are still definitely hard and fixed deadlines in the program. We'll talk, once we get into the 471, I'm going to highlight some of the changes of what this new portal means for filing forms. It will affect some of your deadlines and how you plan your bidding process. The question online, it says, if you use the survey method, then are you saying that you don't need to provide CalPAD's report in response to the TIA review? That is correct. You pick a method that you're going to use, and when it comes to TIA review, you provide the supporting documentation for the method you chose. If you choose surveys, you don't provide supporting documentation for another method. You provide the support for the method you chose. Yes? If your enrollment forms contain the requisite information, yes, you can use those as the survey tool. Correct, you don't. It's, like I said, and that's why I highlighted exactly what information is required in order to be considered a survey form. Something to keep in mind, because of the new document retention rule of 10 years, we'll talk about that a little bit later, whatever method you choose to use, document it and save it, because you can be audited up to 10, 12 years later. And if you can't provide your discount percent documentation, they're going to go with what they can find. It may not be to your best advantage. And if they find that you got more money than they can prove you are due, they can ask for you to have it paid back. The 10 years is at 10 years from the last date of service. No, if you had a PIA review that drug on, it does not extend the 10 years. Do we have any questions in our remote audience? Okay. I'm just going to repeat that for our video conference audience as well as our web audience. Mr. Bello from the California Department of Ed just made a very interesting observation. Because LCFF money is tied to your CalPADS data, it's becoming much better. Year after year, that data is better and better. And one of the examples he provided was the high schools, which always struggled with getting their proper discount percentage because students just simply didn't want to turn the forms in. That is changing because each school district's funding source relies on that report. So it's becoming a much more reliable and a better report for school districts to use. So when you think about that document retention policy, you know that the California Department of Ed is going to keep that data handy. You should also keep it in case you can't get a hold of them, in case, you know, if you ever needed it. But the point is, it's a reliable report that is going to serve you well. We do have a question from our web audience. And the question is basically, is internet service considered as category 2 for E-rate funding? I'm going to save that for our eligible services discussion, which I believe is coming up very quickly here. So I mentioned earlier that your discount percentage is based on two things: how many students qualify for the NSLP program and your urban and rural status. Although looking up your urban-rural status is not going to be something you do often because once it's populated into EPIC, it stays there. But let's say you have a new site. You're curious to know, before things actually get going, what your status is. This slide, slide 43, highlights where you can find that information. There is the urban-rural lookup tool provided by USAC. We'll just take a look at it. We'll scroll from their homepage, the Schools and Libraries program. As we scroll down, on the left side of the screen under Resources and Tools is the link that says Search Tools. Once we click on Search Tools, we scroll down just a little ways and we'll see that urban-rural status. Click on that link and it brings us to the lookup tool. You can look it up by school district, library system, individual school. Because remember, you have a organization-wide status. So if we look up, click on school district and scroll down, what you're going to need to have available are your entity numbers. And as soon as you enter those numbers in, then you can click on the button that says Look Up Urban Rural Status, and it'll give you the status for each site. And then at the end, it'll tell you district-wide what you are. Probably the easiest few slides we're going to go through in the day. Check the time. Okay, we're going to take a break in about 30 minutes, so I think we have enough time to get through a little bit of the eligible services. But now we know that you can receive discounts, exactly which sites and how much discount you get. But what do you get discounts on? There are two categories of service we've discussed, Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 is your data transmission services and internet access. So the question we had on our web audience, internet access is Category 1. Voice service is also Category 1. Please remember, it's subject to phase down, and we'll show you what that looks like in a couple of slides. Yes, that includes VoIP. So all of the most of the previous voice services that qualified are still eligible, but they're subject to phase down. There were a handful of voice components that became flash cuts, and we have a list of those in here for you. Category 2 covers your internal connections, managed internal broadband services, that's new, and your basic maintenance of those eligible internal connections. USAC, the FCC, they update this list annually to finesse it, based on what they're seeing in the field, what should be eligible, what should be added, what should be removed, or what should be modified. Now, you'll note the note at the bottom, it says receipt of funding for these services requires CIPA compliance. That would be your internet access, internal connections, basically anything in Category 2, and your internet access in Category 1. We're going to talk about what CIPA compliance includes and in a later discussion. So let's dive into Category 1 a little bit. It primarily supports the connectivity to the school or library. Fiber, dark or lit, including the modulating electronics. That's a new thing. Modulating electronics in Category 1, yes, when it's connected to dark fiber. Lit fiber, usually it's included in the package. Your service provider includes it in your service offering, and that's what one of the things that was equalized on this round of the eligible services list. If you're purchasing dark fiber, then that means you have to provide the modulating equipment that now qualifies under Category 1. Self-provision fiber is also a new one as of last year. Self-provision fiber is not something we're expecting to see great use out of. However, there are those sites that never get bids for high-speed data. What options do you have? Build my own. You now actually have the option to build your own. That means you also have the staff to manage it, but this is a step in the right direction. Satellite services, DS1, 2, and 3, wireless, including microwave, Ethernet, and you can read the rest of the list. These are all examples of the telecommunications services that are available. Voice is also eligible, subject to phase down. That includes VoIP. So what that means, subject to phase down, it's a 20% reduction compounded for the next 5 years until it goes away completely. So for funding year 2016, there will be a 40% reduction in total. So you can see those that are lower than a 50% discount will not receive any funding on those voice services this year. The question is, that includes dedicated data transmission services for VoIP. We have a slide for that. I'll get right back to that. Eligible, or the Category 1 voice services that are part of the phase down. We have them listed here. And notice the line item or the bullet that says circuit capacity dedicated to providing voice service. We actually are going to talk a little bit more detail because there's some questions that come out of that. All of these items still qualify for E-rate, but subject to phase down, and they're going away entirely by 2019. Now, I mentioned earlier that there were some flash cuts that happened. Keep in mind, these items on your phone bill do not qualify at all. It makes it a little bit tedious for you to go through page by page highlighting these items to remove those ineligible charges, but you're required to do so. A couple that I specifically want to highlight: direct inward dialing and text messaging. Text messaging in the past had some eligibility. You could get it approved. Direct inward dialing, absolutely, you could receive funding on. But those are two of the more common things, not eligible. So here we have that slide dedicated to circuits and the voice phase down. The bottom line is, if there's any part of your circuit that has dedicated bandwidth to a voice service, that percent is not eligible. If you have an entire circuit dedicated to voice, that entire circuit, I say it's not eligible, it's subject to phase down. But if you have voice running over that circuit and it's not dedicated, you don't have a specific bandwidth carved out just for voice, you don't have to cost allocate anything. That entire circuit is 100% eligible and not subject to phase down. So the key difference is whether it's got dedicated bandwidth or not. Now you're going to ask things that are beyond me. So I would have to go to, so our IT folks come to save the day. Can you repeat that, please? Okay. If you shape bandwidth for voice, then you cross-allocate it out. So these are things that's important for you to document because if you're asked, you need to be able to provide and show that you thought about it. If you're asked and you're like, I didn't know I had to do that, then they will likely ask you more questions. So just show ahead of time that you considered this, you documented it, and it makes any sort of review go faster. PIA is only one level of review. There are many other reviews that will kind of come around. The question is, what's driving the voice phase down? It's simply this. E-rate was created to provide internet access to schools and libraries. It was created in 1998. What was the most common way to get internet access anywhere in 1998? Exactly. Well, because of the changes in technology and now high-speed bandwidth is available on a broad scale, they had to redirect the program funds in order to meet the program goals. That's why voice is being phased out. Continuing our Category 1 eligibility discussion, special construction also qualifies for discounts. So what's the difference between special construction and installation? Anyone want to take a... Yes. To get a little bit more detailed, the difference between special construction and installation is kind of like, okay, plug it in, set it on the wall, whatever you do, it's ready to go. Special construction. Let's dig a trench, let's lay some fiber, let's refill that trench, make it look pretty. Special construction requires actual construction. We have listed the components of that are eligible. It's limited to the one-time cost of that installation. There's a note at the bottom that says it doesn't include the non-construction one-time costs, such as network equipment or upfront IRU payments for dark fiber. So, dark fiber. Dark and lit fiber qualify equally now for E-rate. In the past, there was some inequalities. The dark fiber qualified, but you had to purchase that modulating equipment out of priority 2 in the past, which, you know, only this much of us got priority 2. So now it's changed. As I mentioned before, that modulating equipment is qualifies under Category 1. And Slide 54 really talks a little bit more about all of the details of that dark and lit fiber that qualify. Now, I'm going to take a guess that most of you are not considering dark fiber. But most of you have lit fiber or want lit fiber. I know there's still a handful of schools out there that are stuck on T1s and DS3s, and maybe even a smaller handful that are stuck on dial-up. The reason we're highlighting this is because it's another positive change in helping schools get to that internet access and to reach the goals of 2018 with how much bandwidth they have per student. We talked earlier about data plans and the limitation of their eligibility. It still qualifies for E-rate. That's the blanket rule. However, I do not encourage you to apply for it unless you can prove it's the most cost-effective means to deliver internet access to your student population. That is a very high benchmark to prove, considering everything else that's out there. Is it impossible? No. Let's say that you have a portable classroom, and it's only going to be there for a year. Is it cost-effective to install fiber to that classroom? You would have to do the bidding to find out, and then compare that to having another method of data plan out there instead. Those are just examples. Is it a cut and dry no? No, it's not. But home and hospital situation, that's a good question. Unfortunately, the E-rate rules do not allow any E-rate services to leave campus. So if a student is homeschooled for any reason, that student has to provide his own service. Or at least E-rate won't discount that student's service. So you have to seek cost comparison for your data plan. You have to go out to bid for multiple ways to solve the problem, because that's the only way you can compare the cost. And as part of the PIA review process, you will be asked for those comparisons. If you cannot provide them, you will simply be denied. That takes us to the end of Category 1. Have any questions at this point? Yes? What's included in modulating equipment? I'm going to say that I need an IT person to answer that one. I'm an E-rate person. So typically when you get your lit fiber services, that modulating equipment is provided by the service provider. It's a part of your monthly recurring service fee. So the question is on special construction. If you're remodeling and relocating some parts of your facilities, are you able to apply for this special construction cost? Yes, you are. If you have to, even if you're building a new school site, the special construction is eligible as long as it's providing that data transport. It's not to build your school, it's only to provide the eligible E-rate service. So whatever construction is required to provide that service would qualify for E-rate.
Okay.
As it stands now, special construction qualifies. Good point, unless the rule changes. And we know this eligible services list is being modified every year and tweaked. Special construction has been eligible for many, many, many years. This part is not new. Typically, when you go out to bid for, let's say, your wide area network, service provider is going to come back with a bid, and if they know they have special construction, in their bid, they're going to include that information. If they didn't include it, then it ends up being a bogus bid. So you would know if you had special construction in your bid just by simply reading through what's provided from the service provider. So, interesting question on our web is, as a vendor of internet services, will this boot camp enable me to help schools and libraries file for E-rate? There are many underserved schools and libraries throughout the Bay Area. That's an interesting question. This boot camp is certainly going to give you a lot more knowledge. As a vendor, though, you have to be careful of what lines you cross. A vendor cannot help a school or library decide what services they need, and they cannot help a school or library create their bidding process in any form, whether it be an RFP document, whether it be saying, here, this is what you need to put on your Form 470. They cannot be involved in that process. It's considered tainted. So although a service provider can go out to school sites and say, hey, here's what we can do for you, it's up to that school site to then turn around and actually say, you know what, I think I want to get bids on services like that, but I know I have to compare them from multiple companies. We'll talk about that actually a little bit more in the program compliance section, because everyone has a role to play in E-rate. And it's when you start crossing lines that E-rate gets pretty mean. Question in the back.
I know that we're going to do whether there is any special
So the question is there special construction for Category 2 for internal connection? Interesting enough, special construction, that term is mostly categorized with installing of fiber lines and high-speed data lines. So construction for Category 2, we'll look at that when it comes. Yeah, we'll take a look at that when it comes. Category 2, it's an interesting breed of its own, and you could easily bust through your budget pretty quickly if you included construction components in there. Question?
touching on it? Are we going to go a little more?
The question is, will we go into vendor selection and how we accomplish that? And the answer is yes. Yes, we are. Okay. Well, we'll have very specific questions. At this point, if you guys would like to take a break, we'll take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll talk about Category 2 services and budgets.
Your help with getting these. Mikey.
Nice to meet you.
Me too. So, you're a nonprofit service, special education.
Okay.
I'll leave out the questions. I will between that. So, then have that. We have different.
Okay. We'll confuse the rest of us.
Yeah. But I may ask you, what we can do to our survey, the required data from the survey, would be a
I know that they can be easy to work with sometimes, the E-rate books, when that's explained to them, and they'll ask you to provide what you can.
Right. And I can certainly, anonymize the documentation, say family 1, family 2, say we have it on file in our office, actually.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
We haven't come across this yet.
Yeah, personal health information.
I've had only this much exposure from my husband and his field of work, but not combined with E-rate.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I know you want to break too.
Oh, that's okay. I need to look at my future slides too.
So I'm in a different kind of position libraries looking at the CNIC network, and which I thought was going to happen a lot earlier. And dragging issues that I'm not sure CNIC was going to be easy. But then I came to Dave thinking, well, we're going to be thinking,
Right.
and it's not a huge amount of money, actually. Thinking, we might not need to be here.
The question I would have you ask is, are they actually paying for your connection, your library to the or to whatever hub? Are they paying that? On the school side, the school usually pays for their own connection. So I don't know how to set up the library side, but that was my question. What is going to find out more?
Okay.
If they're not, then
There's just that initial connecting, like the work that goes.
the monthly current service
The
for
recurring.
the high-speed line.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, if that's the only reason you're paying it, if you've done that in the past, there's very little change in how the funds take one day and the ethic of it.
I tried to do the password work. But I don't think our IT department does that for 30 minutes.
And are you doing it for the one time 471? So in that case, then for the all the time for you, and just talking to them, and basically waking up. It's interesting that she's going to come up to supporting people, like, didn't support the way they want to.
Yeah. Yeah, this was me and the lab meeting.
Yeah.
It is. And then the state library does.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so we had grants that where does this grant end and where does it begin?
Yeah.
What the library's part. One of my left.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
That's a good thing to know.
Yes, they are. Okay, so if I disappear,
Thank you for letting me know.
not because I'm offended by your presentation.
You know what? I feel bad. I always feel bad for the audience. It's not the most glamorous presentation. Like I
used to come to hear the panel.
Yeah.
And it was like very much the same.
That's why I threw in some scenery, actually.
Yeah. This is like interesting here.
That's true. We got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I had actually emailed everybody that was signed up. I had to do it. Please make sure you come along. When it's time to file their form, you know. Oh yeah, I've heard there's changes, but I'll just leave them on. No, put the ones that have the notes in it. You really don't want to. Although I either UNET or FCC goal, I really think they're putting their foot into one. I was just thinking, even if not really, we have an official city concept, and you guys aren't included in it. We let you take into it because we need funding. And now you're saying it's really official? No, that's not gonna work. Okay. Yeah. And she's oh, it's a parent, no question. Yeah. Yeah, there's no funding. Okay, are we ready to get started? I want to check in with our video conference sites. Do you guys have any questions out there before we go on to the Category 2 services? Okay. What's that?
Looks like anyone's raising their hand.
Question here from Martha.
Okay.
Will you be checking the web questions throughout the slideshow presentation, or are you going to wait until the end of the section before checking the web questions?
I'll wait till the end of each section before checking the web questions, but I've been checking them throughout. Am I missing some?
Yeah, I think those questions got missed.
Okay, thank you. I see one question. Is hosted VoIP subject to phase down? Yes, it is. What about QoS prioritization versus partitioning on voice? I believe this question probably goes back to the dedicated services on a voice line, on a high-speed data line, which would make it either partially eligible or fully eligible and not subject to phase down. I would have to actually come back to this, being that I am versed in the E-rate world. I'm not as versed in the IT world, so I'd have to actually ask one of my IT colleagues specifically on this question. Is that, so from our video conference site that pointed this out to me, did I address the question that was left out, or is there another one? Okay, local audience, do you guys have anything? All right. Move on to Category 2. Category 2 is kind of a broader scope than Category 1 in that it contains 3 different service types. There's internal connections, there's managed internal broadband or managed Wi-Fi, and basic maintenance of those internal connections. It includes the equipment and services that you need to bring the broadband into and throughout the schools and libraries. Now, in the past, we had the 2 and 5 rule when it came to Priority 2. Now we have the 5-year budget. for Category 2. We're going to talk about that budget after we talk about all of the services that qualify. On slide 60, it gives us a specific list of services that qualify: access points, cabling, caching, switchers, racks, UPS. You'll see that all of these items are they're designed to help with internet access, making sure that you have internet access to and within your school site or your library. It also includes improvements and upgrades of the software necessary to support these components. Firewall, when it comes to Category 2, notice it says firewall protection provided by a vendor other than the internet access provider or priced separately is considered internal connection. So that means it has to be counted toward your internal connections budget. This was kind of new. Some of these slides, if you happen to be going to any of USAC's training, you'll recognize some of this information. Virtualized and cloud-based functionalities. So if there's an eligible service that can be provided through cloud-based functionality, it is now eligible for E-rate discount. It includes virtual or cloud-based functionalities, for example, virtualized routing or switching. It sounds good to me, but again, like I said, I'm sure that you IT folks know a little bit more about what this means for you and your options. So I'll just share the information with you at this point. It still has to be competitively bid, and we'll talk more about that. It also has to be the most cost-effective solution. Managed internal broadband services. We're now on the second year of this new category of E-rate eligibility. These will be services provided by a third party. The operation and management of or monitoring of this equipment. That's all the managed internal broadband services. It says here, like, for example, managed Wi-Fi. That is the most common example used. It isn't the only example, but it's the only example that's ever been presented. So if there's other managed broadband, internal broadband services, we'll see what the applications prove to us this year. Basic maintenance of internal connections. This is truly what it sounds like, basic. This isn't your one-time fee that pays for if the equipment breaks, I can get it replaced. But if it doesn't break, I'm going to pay the fee anyway. This pays for the cost of services provided. So in looking at this, you want to go more toward an hourly solution so that you can provide a cost estimate to USAC in getting funded. So as the last bullet point states, it's limited to actual work performed. What it does not include: services to maintain ineligible equipment. That seems like a common sense thing, but because it's on a slide, we know that obviously USAC has seen things come in, possibly not intentionally, but you have a list of equipment and you just say, here's my basic maintenance contract, but you forgot to go through and make sure everything was eligible. So things to keep in mind when you're submitting for your funding request, be sure you only request funding for eligible products and services. Network management services, like a 24-hour network monitoring, does not qualify. On-site technical support and unbundled warranties. Unbundled means that you pay a separate price for it. That does not qualify for discount. But there are eligible or miscellaneous charges that do qualify: taxes, surcharges, other reasonable fees, lease fees, rent, or lease of eligible components, shipping charges, training. Training of who? Training of the IT staff who is going to manage that component, not training of your district staff who have nothing to do with that component. Installation configuration, even if it's by a third party, qualifies for Category 2 services under basic maintenance. Pretty short list anymore. How many of you remember when the eligible services list was almost 70 pages long? I think we're down to 6 pages now, and the first 4 of those pages are the FCC order. That means we have 2 pages of eligible services. Now, we talked about a Category 2 budget. This is where you and your planning comes in. No one can tell you how to spend this budget. It is for Category 2 services only. Does not have anything to do with Category 1. There's no budget on Category 1. So currently, the modernization order has guaranteed funding for this approach until 2019, at which time it will be revisited by the FCC. I've mentioned that more than once, mostly because I would love for everyone to take advantage of it while it's there, because we don't know what changes may come in the future, but right now there's guaranteed funding there for you. So keep in mind that if you happen to do a project that exceeds your budget, you are only going to receive up to the maximum dollar of your budget. You won't receive any more than that, so you may have costs coming out of pocket. You will likely have costs coming out of pocket. Although the budget is a functioning approach right now, you might notice that it's a little bit of a small budget. So who receives the budget? Individual schools and libraries. Branches receive a budget. School district office, non-instructional facility, no budget. Cafeteria, non-instructional facility, no budget. So only a school site or a library and library branch. How much is that budget, that little piece of the pie? It's based on your total, for school sites, it's based on your total enrollment. You get $150 per student with a minimum of $9,200. If you happen to have fewer than 62 students. That's a pre-discount budget. Libraries, pre-discount, $2.30 per square foot, minimum of $9,200. However, libraries get a bump if they happen to be in an urbanized area of population more than 250,000, then they're at $5 a square foot. They're serving a denser population. So here's your example. When I say pre-discount, that's a key word to keep in mind. You are going to pay some out of pocket. That's the way E-rate works. You have to have some skin in the game. So for our high school with 4,052 students enrolled at $150 per student, that gives us a budget of $607,800. So that's our budget, meaning we're going to pay 20% of that because we're an 80% district. E-rate's going to pay $486,240 of that. You can use that budget toward any Category 2 services. You can use that budget all at once. You can spread that budget over 5 years or anything in between that. It is completely up to you and your planning. Now remember, this is only this proposal, or should I say this way of doing the budget is good for the next 5 years up until 2019. So if you happen to wait until 2018 and 19, I suggest you go for all of it. But at this point, if you choose to spread it, you have that option. We have the example of the library and how it's calculated by square foot. Same sort of scenario. It's the pre-discount budget, and then you know how much your share is going to be based on how much E-rate is going to pay. Do you have any questions so far? Here.
Where your school is growing, so how does that?
So if you're a new school and you're growing, actually we'll talk about that in a moment, but just to quickly address it, let's say you're a new school and you have no idea what your population is going to be. You estimate it, and then once you start your funding year, your school year, you will know at that time what your enrollment is. Then you true it up. If you overestimated, you will be paying funds back. But if you underestimated, that just means you have more funds to spend in the next year. Enrollment fluctuations are tracked from year to year. Let's say that this year you had 100 students and that's what you put as your survey results or your CalPAD data. You put 100 students, but next year you have 150. And this year you used all your budget for the 100 students. At 150 next year, that's a new set of data. They're going to say, okay, now you qualify for this dollar amount. We already paid you this, so you get the difference. But let's say the following year you drop. That means you just simply don't qualify for any more funds. They're not going to take funds back at that point because you've qualified at a higher rate based on numbers that were substantiated. So we talked about the time period it covers. It's a 5-year budget. Again, use it as what fits best in your scenario. This is where that managed internal broadband connection comes in. If you choose to get a service and you sign a 5-year contract, you've got a fixed rate for 5 years. You know what it's going to be. You just apply year after year for your E-rate discount. But if you're trying to perhaps purchase switches and routers, you might have a different approach. And you can have any combination of that. Slide 74, we just talked about the increase and decrease of your budget. So if you need to refer back to that, it's on slide 74. New schools, as I mentioned, you would estimate your budget. And I encourage you to estimate based on, something reasonable, not shooting for the moon. Now, one thing I need to highlight, each budget is specific to that school site. Budgets cannot be shared. So what if you happen to have your data centers at your district office and you need some services to provide to all of your school sites? Currently, the guidance is you can install equipment at the district office, but you're going to cost allocate if the district office happens to be using any of those services, cost allocate what their percentage is out of it. Now let's say the rest of that is being shared between 3 school sites. Then you would assign how much value goes to each site's budget. That's the way E-rate is functioning at this point. Each site has its budget, and whatever services are being provided to that site have to affect that site's budget. Slide 76 provides a couple of methods to cost allocate. These aren't the only methods. There's the simple straight line method. Just divide evenly by how many users there are. Proportional, based on student count or square footage for a library, or any other method that you can substantiate. So you're not limited, but these are the ones that have been shared. So now that you have your budget and you've applied for E-rate funding, how does that actually get accounted against your budget? Once you start filing the Form 471, it gives you a clue of how that counts against your budget, because you have to tell the program exactly if you're buying this switch, who's using the switch, and you have to assign every school site that's going to touch that switch. And if you're going with a percentage method, okay, now what's the percentage? So now you know, okay, once I execute that funding request and I receive monies against it, then it's been charged. Those schools' budgets have been charged. So that's how money is counted against your budget, based on when you receive it. Now, let's say that you applied for some Category 2 funds. Something happened, you weren't able to implement that project this year, so you can ask for an extension. But what if you realize we kind of went out to bid for something, we've changed direction, so we need to bid for something different? You can cancel that funding request, and it goes back to your budget and start over with a new year and a new funding request. If you received funds, but then you need to return funds for whatever reason, I'm sure those scenarios exist, then what's highlighted here is the payment identification worksheet. That's what you fill out in order to return funds, but just know you need to provide additional information. USAC has not yet developed a form of what that additional information would look like, but you need to tell them exactly what school site that budget goes back to, especially if it was a shared service. And you might even need to tell them exactly what piece of equipment you returned, so that when an auditor comes out, they're not looking for something that you returned, or they already know ahead of time that this piece of equipment is not on site. So those are just a couple of examples of specific information you need to provide to USAC should you be in the position of returning funds. On the budget piece, pretty straightforward to think about what it means and what it does. The actual implementation of it can get a little bit challenging. So with this information so far, do we have any questions? Yes.
how do I apply for the category two? Meaning that they were different, they both qualified for four bucks. If they're the same building, do I apply for both in capital allocation percent, or how do I maximize the count without breaking the total?
So you're in that is a very unique scenario. I'll just repeat it for the web audience. We have a school with 2 sites, 2 CDF codes, but they share the same classroom. They alternate times of when they're in that classroom. Your scenario actually kind of falls into one of the very minor or very slim loopholes. Because there's 2 CDF codes, each school should qualify for their $9,200 floor, because you don't have at least 62 students in each one. And having said that, if you bought one piece of equipment to share between the 2 of them, you would cost allocate, whether you choose to do the straight line method and go 50-50 to each, or if you did proportional because this one's a bigger group of students than this one is. Either way, you would have to cost allocate to share that service between 2 sites. Yes, it is definitely okay. It's kind of like the same scenario of having your equipment at a district office that's shared by multiple school sites. So you just need to identify who's using the equipment and what percentage belongs to which group. You're welcome.
Michelle has a question.
Go ahead.
Is wireless authentication software E-rate eligible, like Cisco Identity Services Engine?
Wireless identification software. That's a good question. I am going to take that one back.
Okay, thank you.
I'm making note of that one right now. Now, let's see if we have any questions on our web. Okay. Questions?
Going back to what's eligible, for example, UPS or money. You put out a request for that, and have a budget, you do that budget, buy that. And you get to make a request for that unit.
Not quite sure I'm following your question. When you go out to bid, you have to specify what you're going out to bid for.
Does that be specific, just one thing, or it can be a group?
It can be a group of things. It can be a very long list or it can be a very short list, but it has just whatever you're bidding on it can be as much as you need.
I guess I was thinking more like, okay, versus rather, yeah, like, does that mean each of that different category of equipment separate out in different bids? So it's categorized differently for that.
Good question. There's multiple ways you can do it. We're going to get into a lot of this when we talk about the bidding process, but specifically to your question, remembering how you're going to end up putting information into the 471 should drive how you do your bidding process. And the 471 is site-specific when it comes to budget. So if you had a project at a site, you can put all of those pieces that go to that site on one bid. You can do separate bids, or you can do one total bid and just require different responses for each site. But you'll save yourself a lot of work if you get the responses from the service provider by site. Questions? So the question is, how long must E-rated equipment reside at the site that it was applied for? That actually hasn't changed. It's still a 3-year period, at which point you can move it, but you have to notify USAC that you have moved the equipment. You can end of life it, or you can surplus it, and once you do that, you can do anything you want with it. You can move it to a different location. I know in the past, part of the strategy was to do that so that you could get equipment, even though it was older, for those sites that never qualified for Priority 2. But now with Category 2, and there being enough funds to cover it, a lot of districts are rethinking their strategy on that because every site's qualifying now. And you think about it, the very first year of all this change, making things ineligible and then reducing voice by 20% helped make sure that there was enough funds. Well, now we're reducing voice again by another 20%. So the likelihood of there not being enough funds is slim at this point. But then again, how many actually apply for Category 2? That's an unknown at this point because they haven't all been funded yet. We really can't do our data comparison to see how many applied versus how many didn't. So any questions further on the Category 2 services or budget before we start diving into CIPA compliance? CIPA compliance is something that we haven't talked a whole lot about in recent years because it's been one of those constants. Since 2001, it's been a constant in the program that you had to be CIPA compliant if you're receiving funds for internet access or internal connection. So we're going to readdress it because it is still part of the program, and with so many of you being new, it's something that you need to know ahead of time so that you don't get caught in a bind. CIPA, Children's Internet Protection Act. It was enacted in December of 2000, but as far as E-rate goes, you didn't have to really comply with it until April of 2001. Anyone who's receiving discounts on internet access, internal connections, or anything in Category 2 has to be CIPA compliant. And that's been a challenge for libraries. And now that all the voice services are being phased out, thankfully you're left with high-speed data lines. But because libraries don't filter, they're part of, public access. So that limited what libraries were able to receive discounts on. It's not required if you're simply receiving high-speed data lines. So it's something to keep in mind. If you are not paying, if you're not receiving E-rate discount on your internet access, and there still are sites out there who aren't for good reason, and if you're not receiving Category 2 funding, then you do not have to be CIPA compliant. But local policy sometimes dictates that you still need to be because it's a community thing anymore. And parents want their children safe. They want their internet filtered for the safety of their own children. If you happen to be a first-time applicant in the E-rate world, you have an additional 2 years from your first application in order to become CIPA compliant. What does that mean? What is CIPA compliant? You must have an internet safety policy. You must have a technology protection measure, which is generally your filter. And you have to have a public notice of and a public meeting or hearing on that internet safety policy. Public notice, does it have, what does that mean? If you happen to look at your board, whenever the board meetings are announced, most of those front page says public notice, board meeting, here. And this is what we're going to discuss. Wherever that is typically posted, and if it includes a comment about we will be talking about our CIPA compliance, there's your public notice. For most of you, that happened somewhere back in the 2001, 2002 timeframe. Very important for you to be able to prove that it took place. So, go back, review your board policies, and find it. I can't find it. Now what? Redo it. It's critical. This is one of those components that if you can't prove that you're CIPA compliant, you lose all of your E-rate funding. So that's one of the reasons we brought it back into the presentation. It is very critical to E-rate funding. If you want to see detailed discussions on what CIPA compliance, Children's Internet Protection Act is, we provided links to the FCC's website on their discussion of it. But we've also provided links to the instructions for the Form 486 and the Form 479. Both of those forms have certifications in there where you're saying we are CIPA compliant. So if you've been signing those forms and you're not CIPA compliant, you've been in violation. kind of the reason we provided them the links on this slide. It is important, if you've not read your certifications, to at least read them once and make your, whoever it is that's given the final certification, make them aware of what they're certifying to. Good question. Does the public notice have to be ongoing or just verification that it happened? And realistically, if you can show that it happened way back in 2001, that's it. You don't have to do it again. If it's on the board agenda and on the board minutes in particular, both of those, then that's the proof that it took place. Question? So how does it change for libraries? It really doesn't change. What has changed for libraries is what they used to apply for in the past is being phased out, which was voice services. Now libraries are limited to, until voice is fully phased out, they have that access, but then they're limited to their high-speed data line. Yes, so the question is, if you have a guest network on your school campus, should it still be filtered in the same way? And the simple answer is yes. If E-rate contributed any funding toward that network, yes, it must be filtered. That's exactly it. The question is, if it has to be redone, is it just a matter of putting it in the board agenda to readopt? That's exactly what needs to be done. Following the same steps of the public notice and giving opportunities for people to discuss it at the board meeting, which doesn't happen very often, but that's the public hearing part of it. And just simply stating we are reassessing and readopting our compliance with CIPA. Question? Mm-hmm. So the public notice, it has to happen at least once for every applicant.
So a lot of people have done that previously.
Correctly. Most of you have already done it. The challenge is proving that you've done it, because however board minutes are tracked and agendas are tracked, that's why I encourage you, if it's not already in your E-rate file, this is just something you can carry forward from year to year, is go ahead and find that. Because if it comes down to a point where, let's say you're getting a selective review, you've got to find this information. They ask for it. So it's just one of those things, being proactive, keeping it in your E-rate file from year to year. Because let's take, for example, this selective review. You're going through that in a 2-week period. You don't have time to suddenly get to your board and have a board meeting and a public notice within that review period. But keep in mind, if you can't find your documents from way back when and you go through a selective review and they say, oh, you weren't compliant until 2015, that means you were incompliant or non-compliant prior to that, it could create issues. So that's why I hope that you can all find your documentation. Now, in 2008, there was an addition added to the CIPA compliance, and that was Protecting Children in the 21st Century Act. It became effective in 2012. This simply means that minors are being educated on cyberbullying awareness and response. This one does not apply to libraries at all, only to schools. Schools are required now to educate their students on the cyberbullying awareness and response. Now, USAC has not, and the FCC have not told schools how to educate. They're leaving that totally up to local control. But in order to prove that you've done it, you have to document it somehow. And there's multiple resources out there. I don't know that I've provided very many resources in this presentation, but there are different attorney groups that provide, say, your HR compliance are also now providing that protecting children in the 21st century compliance, videos that students can watch, and they all log in, so you have record of who's seen it and who hasn't. Another example, a high school did an assembly day and demonstrated what bullying was and how it should be handled. So they logged in who was in attendance that day, and everybody was in the assembly in the auditorium for that training. So the variety of training is completely up to you. And you can see the wisdom behind that because every community is different. What may work somewhere on the East Coast doesn't fit the West Coast personality. So it's completely up to local control. So the statement is, if that's built into your technology plan and that's approved by the board, then you have that mechanism to provide the training. And that's exactly true, too. It's one of those, whatever you say, be sure that you do. So if it's in your technology plan, then just simply follow through with what's been sent to the board and approved. They do make comment that you can have different sorts of training for different age groups. So making sure that it fits your population is important. Otherwise, it's of no benefit. I can imagine in your situation it would still be challenging, but like I said, that's one of the reasons they left it so wide open. Yes. Does the training have to occur yearly? Again, that's something that's actually not defined. It has to occur often enough that you can say that all of your students have been trained. So does that mean that you train your kindergartners and then you don't touch them again until they move on to the middle school? Most agencies that I've had any connection with have chosen to do it yearly. But then again, like I said, the order doesn't define that. Do you have any questions in our remote audience that are either of our video conference sites? Now, one thing I will point out on the CIPA compliance, because this was added to CIPA compliance, it doesn't require a new posting, a new public hearing. It just simply is new things that you have to comply with. You have a question?
Is there a requirement that client devices that normally house that school must also have?
So are you referring to when they leave campus? So the question is, if you have devices that are on campus and compliant, do they have to remain compliant when they leave campus? Bottom line is, whatever happens off campus, E-rate doesn't care about because E-rate doesn't fund it. That's the way it stands right now. That may change in the future, but right now, if it leaves campus, E-rate doesn't fund it. At that point, it can fund it during the time it's on campus. And at that point, you have to comply with all the E-rate rules.
Think about the report that responsibility. Like the bullying, I got in a fight when I was in middle school. In middle school, I got in a fight on the weekend. Responsibility that you as a kid and parent. So school really take that responsibility. Bullying happens on the weekend. You know, it's a hard question. I don't know the answer. That's why everybody's asking to think about it on at what point, where is the line constitute, where it's a good point, that it's not important. I mean, for the reason that I asked the question, that as I monitor safety and a lot of people making reference to, so we're providing like they go home and they must be compliant to their home. That was never part of my reading rule. the other day who was providing low cost. There's the Wi-Fi program, separate program. Company at Walmart going, hey, so look, if you qualify, we'll give you a low cost, compliant device, another device, and it's selling. Or I started reading the terms and conditions, and I'm like, I won't take it. It says these people will audit and look at the company has right to audit and look at all my apps I do it. Companies to come and in for my house and take it. These people just check the box, and I'm going, I don't know if I would be happy with that. You know, maybe go back and look at my one I first or my first, you know, because you know they have, but it's just one of those things, and if it's under the guise that it was funded part of a lifetime program, and instead it was just a compliance, therefore all these things. I don't know how much of that is true or not, but it made me really think. It's one of those things, and I think all people are starting to think about it. Well, okay, what is it? Our I think as educators are urged, well, let's do that. But then we have to take a step back and think about, as kids, what was our responsibility as all of our parents over us and the schools, and we really want to take that responsibility now as a question back. Well, just pull outside my role as an educator. I'm just trying to figure out how to help raise the college.
So there's CIPA compliance and protecting children in the 21st century in a nutshell. Again, this is another one that's easy to talk about. It just takes a little bit of time to implement. One of the things that you're encouraged to do to prove CIPA compliance on an ongoing basis is to have at least one report of a filtering log yearly. So for your 2010, you have your 2010 log, and each E-rate year, you put that log in. So filtering equipment and services fall under category 2. Here's the interesting part. E-rate requires filtering. E-rate does not pay for filtering.
Question for Merced.
Yes, go ahead, Merced.
Going back to eligible services, would E-rate pay for wireless broadband services on school buses?
Would E-rate pay for wireless broadband services on school buses? According to the definition of educational purpose, the answer is yes. Even though they're not on school campus, they're still within a school-owned facility, if you would say. As soon as that school bus reaches back to its bus barn, then it's back on campus. And the same would be true. That was one of the justifications for having wireless cell phones for superintendents or anyone help with students on field trips. Unfortunately, that justification will no longer work. But for buses, the thought process right now is that yes, it would still qualify for wireless. It's not a wireless data plan, but if you're providing wireless internet for that bus driver to use on his, you know, and some other variety. Exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's open to the students on the bus. Thank you. So, Merced, could I ask you, was your question more around whether or not you could provide wireless internet not only for the bus driver, but also for the students of the bus?
Primarily for the students.
I care about the bus driver. He has a flag, he can do something. No, I appreciate Jackie pointing that out.
Just came to mind. Your own side.
Policy of bring your own device, and does that affect E-rate? Can you be a little more specific in what effect?
People bringing their own device. They share.
And they're accessing your network? Your, mm-hmm. What devices access your network doesn't affect E-rate. It's whether or not that network, once it hits the internet, is filtered. It has to be filtered for the internet. But allowing other devices to connect to your network, that's more of an internal policy. It doesn't affect E-rate because E-rate doesn't and never has funded end user devices. So if you're bringing your own device or if the school site's providing the device, as long as that network that internet access is filtered. And it's all, again, goes back to the educational purpose. Why are they stepping on campus? It's for some sort of educational purpose. If it's a training, if it's a parent-teacher conference, they're stepping on campus for an educational purpose. The bus question, I'm going to actually do some investigating on that one and see if I can provide you a more realistic response. Have any other questions before we move on? Okay. Question is it a good idea to redo the public notice every once in a while? As long as you can prove that the public notice was done, you really don't have to. Is it a good idea? Does your community want to know about it? That's a different question. When it comes to E-rate, you don't have to, but local policy, you may want to. Okay, so we talked about meat and potatoes earlier. Now we're getting to the meatier of the meat, E-rate cycle. USEC has been updating its website quite frequently lately. And this is one of the new things that they've provided is what does the new cycle look like, given the fact that we have the portal. The portal is throwing in a couple of new options for us, but you'll find that a lot of the basics have remained the same. We're going to start off talking about competitive bidding, and you'll see that's step one of the E-rate cycle. Competitive bidding starts with the Form 470. It really is the cornerstone of E-rate. The goal of this program is to provide internet access to all students, but not just internet access at any cost. The most cost-effective means of providing internet access. So when we start our bidding process with the Form 470, that Form 470 identifies who we're bidding for, the number of eligible entities that will receive discounts. It's also going to identify the services that we want discounts on. That may or may not include an RFP. It'll also contain its own certifications. When you read through those certifications, it will remind you of program rules that you need to be compliant with during this time period. For example, your bidding window has to be a minimum of 28 days. During that time, you are not soliciting service providers to find out about their solutions. That's something you should have done prior to your bidding window. Service providers can ask you questions about your RFP and what they're bidding on, but you want to be sure and provide equal information to everyone. That comes to the fair and competitive process. If you happen to have a buddy at one of the service providers, don't make the mistake of saying, hey, I know you could use this information, so I'm going to share it with you, but if nobody else asks for it, I'm just not going to say anything. That would be tainted. And, you know, things have a way of coming out. And it's like if you want to compromise your funding, then, you know, live on the edge. But go ahead and do things in a way that you can prove that you were fair and open and competitive. The other thing you want to do in your bidding process is clearly define what would be a disqualifying factor for any service provider. Because if you don't clearly define it and you end up disqualifying someone, they can contest your bid, which can delay your funding. delay your award of your project. Now, E-rate requires that you not only follow the federal E-rate bidding rules, but you have to follow state and local bidding rules. So one of the state things that you should be aware of is the bidding threshold. Currently for 2015, it's set at 86,000. That will likely be updated in December for the 2016 year. What does this $86,000 magic number mean? If your project is going to exceed that, then you must do a formal bidding process. A formal bidding process requires a request for proposal, detailed specifications of your project. It also requires public notice, posted in the newspaper once a week for at least 2 consecutive weeks. Knowing this ahead of time helps you plan your bidding process because it will affect your timeline. Now, in the past, you could submit your 470 and post your RFP together and your clock was started. Within the new EPIC portal, that submit process is gone. You certify your 470. If it's not certified, it's not live. That's something that you just need to be aware of. Whoever is certifying your forms has to be available. If you've got a big project planned and you've got an RFP associated with it and a tight window, you need to plan ahead to make sure these people are available to do their certification. Evaluating bids. So now that we've put together our RFP, or let's say we're not doing an RFP, we just simply have the Form 470 and no additional documents. We let that 28-day pass. We could choose to do a 6-week bidding window, whatever it is, whatever timeline it is, a minimum of 28 days has passed. Now we can start evaluating the bids that came in. One of the things that you did ahead of time was create your bid evaluation matrix. You could have, if you wanted to, post that information online because it helps bidders respond to you. If you're giving heavier weight to a specific area, they can provide you more information in that area. But you have to, the end result of that bidding evaluation and that matrix is to select the most cost-effective solution. So price is not does not have to be the only factor that you're looking at. It just has to be the heaviest weighted factor. Now, it is okay at this point to communicate with service providers if you don't understand their offering, if you need clarification on their bid. Feel free to ask them questions. Do it through email so it's documented. And that way you've got everything it's got time stamping, so you can show that you've done it after the close of the bidding window. Question? The question, is it a 28 calendar bidding window or 28 working days? It's actually calendar days. 28 calendar days. The Form 470, as soon as you post it, it instantly calculates that 28th day for you, and it tells you what your allowable contract date is. Another question. Are you allowed to ask for specific brands? You can, but you must include the language that you will accept alternative proposals or equivalent.
So let's say I have I was never and I only want Russell.
This has been, honestly, this question about you have a certain environment. The example was Ruckus. You need to add some wireless access point. Nothing else is going to work with it. It's a no-brainer. And that was brought up with the FCC. And the bottom line is it's difficult to make exceptions in one area and then apply a rule in another. So the rule is you have to entertain equivalent service providers. But part of that entertaining is you can leave it on their shoulders to show that it's actually going to function within your network. Question?
As far as this, I was thinking about hybrid systems. Is that how complicated is that? Not provide access to all of the each have
Okay, so your question is on basically a wide area network. You want to have a wide area network installed, and you need to provide all the locations. You can do that with or without an RFP, depending on how complex your agency is. When you go online to the Form 470, we're going to do that in a few minutes because I want to show everyone some of the restrictions, that shoebox that we all have to put our foot into, some of the restrictions of the new Form 470. It actually makes some of this easier in building certain things like that. So we'll look at that as soon as we're done with this section.
I got one different.
So the question is, can you dictate where the support services come from? Can you put a mileage restriction? Can you do that? Yes, you can, as long as it is publicized. It has to be reasonable. I mean, you can't be in a very small town and say, I want only a local vendor that's within 5 miles. State of California is pretty big. I have seen some bids go out with a 100-mile radius because they want response time. Now, something to keep in mind, I would assume that you're having issues with a service provider who's made, basically, you've had a bad experience. That can be one of your bid evaluations. Experience the service provider. So, if you use that as a criteria, though, be prepared to justify it. Well, wait a minute, you give this guy no points for experience. Why? So that's just it. Whatever you choose to do, just be prepared for the documentation that might have to go behind it. It doesn't have to be extensive, it just has to be real. When you're specific, are you required to have an RFP? That's a good point. If you have disqualifying factors that you have to put it somewhere, you can put it in the Form 470. If you have multiple projects that's going out and you have different sets of disqualifying factors, then it is advisable to have an RFP. It doesn't have to be formal, but if anything is put in writing separate from the 470, it's considered an RFP, even if it is one sheet of paper. Okay, so the last bullet point on this slide talks about lowest corresponding price. That became the buzzword, one of the buzzwords last year. Lowest corresponding price has always been a part of the program, but it has been a very difficult thing to implement. Now with data transparency and all of us being forced to fit into the same shoebox, it's going to be easier to compare prices regionally, countywide, statewide, state to state, nationwide. The lowest corresponding price is going to be easier to enforce. What it basically is a provider is going to come in and offer you a service that will be equal to what they would offer to a similarly situated customer. So it doesn't mean that you're going to pay home prices for your internet service because you're obviously not similarly situated to a home, a residential facility. But you would be similarly situated to another commercial customer. Exactly, business. So it's becoming more of a hot topic between service providers because all of a sudden we can see what they're charging everybody because of this new data transparency and the Epic portal. It does not rest on you to prove lowest corresponding price. That responsibility resides with the service provider, and USAC will go to the service provider if they have questions about it. So through this bidding process, what happens if you don't receive any bids? It's hard to go out and buy something if you don't know what you're going to pay for it. Well, the first thing you want to do is keep a written record of this fact. It may be the only evidence you have in an audit that you did not receive any bids. You can keep written record by sending yourself an email. Send your E-rate team an email documenting on this bid, we received no bids as of the 28th day. So now we're going to do, you can contact service providers on your own, reach out to them to solicit bids. Just be sure you contact multiple providers. Don't go just for one because you know they're going to respond. You have to have something to compare. And that's where the bid evaluation matrix comes in. You can review anything you receive as a result. If you reach out and contact service providers because you didn't receive bids, you're not restarting a 28-day clock. You are finishing your bidding process. It's that 28-day clock that gave you the ability to now reach out. But if you do choose to post a new Form 470 or a new RFP, at that point you are restarting a clock. So the question is, can you have multiple 470s in the new Epic portal? You can. That has not changed. The only thing that I'm basically cautioning you on slide 94 is what restarts the clock is if you post a new RFP or you post a new 470 for that same service. Now, if you post a new RFP that's different from the original, you would have to post a new 470 because it wouldn't be reflective in that original 470. But again, if you're just simply reaching out to service providers because you didn't get anything, that does not restart the clock. You just don't want to do that before the 28th day. Yes? If you got no bids and you already are receiving that service, can you just simply stay with the incumbent? But you can, but it's not advised. It is advised that you actually reach out and compare bids because that is something that's on the radar of USAC. They want to know that you've got the most cost effective, and you can't do that if you don't have anything to compare against. Now, let's say you're in an area where your high-speed data line, you've only got one option for a service provider. Document it. In your email saying, I received no responses, we are going to continue with our incumbent because there are no other options for service providers. I will caution you, if you don't look out, just do a broadcast of saying, is anyone out there that can provide this service? There may have been a service provider come into your area that you just simply weren't aware of. That was a scenario that happened in Northern California, way up in the hills. And when it came to light, it became a competitive bidding issue because they didn't look out and see, is there someone else that can provide the same service at a more cost-effective rate? So even if you don't get anybody responding to it, it's encouraged that you at least put the request out there. It does. It does. It's one of those, just because they don't respond doesn't mean you can do old hat kind of thing. You still have to compare. That is definitely an interesting question. If you do get responses and you're not necessarily satisfied with them, can you then reach out and request more bids? Before I answer that, I'd like to confirm what my instinct is with all these changes. Yes. The 86,000 bid threshold is a yearly total. If you think you might be close to that threshold, it is better because what will happen if you end up over it, you got to redo it. Okay, this goes back to if you only get one bid, document it. The documentation has to do with auditing. Because if you only get one bid, how can you prove that you didn't just simply throw away all the other bids? So document that you only got one bid. Then go ahead and reach out to other vendors. Make sure there's no one else who can provide the service, and document that you did that too. That's best case scenario. That's in the perfect world. And obviously there are things that interfere with that. And if you reach out to the world and don't get anything back, then you've done all you can. Email, letter, pick up the phone, call around. A lot of times, here locally, there was a company that ended up being able to provide E-rate service. They weren't an E-rate vendor, but once they realized that they could provide the service, they got on board. But they didn't know about E-rate before then. And they've been a very reliable service now for this area for many years. Exactly. If you make phone calls, make a log. Keep a log of who you called and what the response was. So we talked about the evaluation matrix and how cost of the eligible goods and service has to be the heaviest weighted factor. We're going to show you an example on the next slide. You can have any other factor in there you want. Prior experience, personnel qualifications, cost of ineligible components, even financial stability of the company. You can have any other criteria in there you choose. This is your tangible aid to selecting the most cost-effective and proving it. So here we have our example. In each category, we have our points here, and notice for price, the points is 30 points, all the way down to the bottom, totaling to 100. Now, in the different scenarios, the one who has first place on price, the cheapest price, is actually vendor 2. They got 30 points. They're the cheapest. But when you look at the totals at the bottom, the one that ended up with the most points was the one that came in second price for price, because he had other qualifications that ended up outweighing price. So we can see that price is not your only determining factor. It's just the heaviest weighted. So now that you've gone through the process of bidding, you've selected your service providers and documented it through your bid evaluation matrix. By the way, it's recommended that you have it 2 to 3 people who go through that bid evaluation matrix, and then you have the end results of that. It shows better diligence than just one person doing it. Sign it, document it, put it in your E-rate file. So now it's time to award those services. Again, it goes back to following your policies, especially your local policies. If there's anything locally that determines how you award services, many times you might be surprised how often you have to get your board involved. And so I say that because so many times school functions day to day. Board meets once or twice a month. So you're doing things constantly and don't realize you need to go back and get board ratification or board approval, one of the two. Now, in the E-rate world, it says a purchase order may act as a contract. In the state of California, a purchase order is not a contract. So there's opposing rules there. So which one do you follow? The one that's most restrictive. California says no. So it's no. You need to have an actual signed contract if that is what's standard for that service. If you're purchasing equipment, there may not be a contract signed, but you're going to sign something like a letter of intent or an agreement stating we're purchasing from this quote for these E-rate funds during this time period, but just something that documents that you awarded to that service provider. You need something signed and dated. E-rate will ask for it. If there's no date on it, then they question, when did you award this? How do I know this wasn't from before the bidding window even opened? You need things to be signed and dated. Be sure that your signature date is after the allowable contract date. Those little timing issues can really mess things up. Yes?
So how does that work with long-term contracts? Kind of a 4 or 5 year contract. So define each year, you will be in a contract. So you would have a contract that you sign prior to
So So it's a very good question. How does that work with multi-year contracts? You have a 5-year contract, and in your 470 you just posted, but your contract signature is going to be from how many years ago? So what happens with multi-year contracts is you have one bidding process. If you end up in a multi-year contract, you do not have to rebid that service. You keep referring back to that original 470 that took care of that bidding process when you originally selected that provider. If all of your services are in contract and you're not going out for anything new, you can skip the 470 process and go straight to the 471. As long as you have a 470 associated with the bidding process and all of your dates line up properly. Voluntary extensions, they have to be clearly defined in the original contract. It can't be something that you have a 2-year contract for long distance services and you just forgot to go to bid. Hey, can we just extend this 1 more year? No. It has to be clearly defined in the original contract. I can't stress enough how important it is to document the process. And this is simply because when it comes to an audit, E-rate is very unforgiving. And an auditor can make you crawl in your skin like you wouldn't believe. So document the process, and it'll make it easier on you as well as the auditor. Keep copies of everything. The RFP, if one was used, all communications with service providers and consultants. Keep all of your bids, winning and losing. That's how you prove that whatever you chose was cost effective, because you have it to go back and look at. Keep a copy of your evaluation matrix and, of course, your signed contract. Now, the new rule states that the document retention policy is 10 years. 10 years from the last date of service. So if we go back to that multi-year contract, and it's a 5-year contract, last date of service would make it about 16 years that you have to keep that bidding documentation. Invest in warehouses or scan everything in and PDF it. Yes?
That on the second part of the portal for positions, we scan it at.
Good question.
Because that's something in full, it looks easier to file, and it's not necessarily all of the questions. Yeah. So it'd be nice 15 years down the road that something's wrong.
So here's the way the portal is going to work based on what's been shared with us right now. It will have the ability to upload RFPs and contracts. But, and they're telling us it will always be there. Once you upload it, you can't remove it. So be careful what you upload. It can be great for retaining your documents. However, USAC and the FCC is still putting that burden of retention on you, the applicant. So although they are providing this great tool, it's not all inclusive yet, but the burden is still on you. So I have some questions on basically some data analysis for category 1 and 2. How much of this pie is available in the San Francisco Bay Area? And is there data available as to how dollars have been spent in the past by category 3? So to answer how much of this pie is available for the Bay Area depends on student enrollment. What is the need? It's basically just what it depends on. And how much has been spent in the past? There is a great tool called the data retrieval tool that contains a lot of information. It's not everything, but it's the best we have available to look at history and how much has been received in any given area. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Data retrieval tool is accessible online on the USAC website under search tools. And you can search by year, you can search by applicant, or you can search by state. Do we have any questions remotely on what we've talked about so far? at Alameda or San Mateo, Merced or Fresno. Did you have another question?
Going on the rate process, we were able to not have to do our
Okay, so in the E-rate process, an RFP is mandatory if you're over the threshold. That's a California rule. So if a California rule states if you go with one of these pre-bid, like CMAS, with then that avoids that formal bid process, then that's the rules you follow. You still may have to post your 470, you know, in order to make that whole bidding process whole. Correct. If you're going with CalNet, yeah, exactly. CalNet has its own, exactly. The state's already done the bidding process, so you don't have to redo that. And that's the same with WISCA, with CMAS, with a few others that are recognized by the state of California. Mm-hmm. So the question is, with a sample bid matrix, do you have to use that same criteria every year? Can you change it yearly? The reality is you can change the criteria based on project. Every project is going to have its own desired outcome. So you can have 5 different evaluation matrices in the same year. This does bring us to the end of our bidding process. Do we want to see what it looks like on the portal? I actually do want to show you a little bit of the 470 on the portal because of the changes to the program this year. How many of you have had a chance to even log into your portal? Very nice. You know that 60-day change of your password? Just putting the old one in. Okay, so I already had a 470 started. I'm not too far into it, so we're just going to take a look at that one. It's listed down here. If I click here on this, it's going to let me view it. So then how do I get back into my 470? I'm going to be upfront with you all. I'm still learning this as well. It's brand new to all of us. So if any of you have had more experience in playing around with this, feel free to speak up. But from what I've learned, yep, up here in the task menu, we have a 1 behind it. It's what they call their auto nag. I think once a week you'll get an email telling you that you haven't finished something you started. Well, in here, if I click on the finish my form 470, it takes me right back into it. And here we are. The very first thing I did was just the basic information of starting the 470. And I get to name the 470 whatever I wish. My advice to you when you name your 470, pretend that you had to search for your 470 in a database that listed everybody in the nation. So find a naming convention that works for you. If you want to put the funding year first and then your entity number after that, that's pretty good. But yeah, that's one of the limitations of the system that we've all struggled with. So on our 470, we're going to start by adding a new service. Now I actually selected this 470 to be a Category 1 470, so we're only going to see Category 1 options. Here's that box where I'm going to fit into. First, what are you going to bid for? Here's all your options. You have to pick something, and it's got to fit within this. So let's say that we're going to bid for lit fiber services. Number of entities served. Question? you would actually post it twice. One for lit, and the next line item could be dark. Let's see what options we have. Internet access and transport bundles. So this is where, like I said, it's going to be a little more cookie cutter so that we get that data transparency. But it makes you really start to understand your services a little bit more. This is the list. Nothing will be added this year. Now, next year I can't speak for. So we're going to do lit fiber service. Number of entities served. How many entities? How big are we building our wide area network? We want to go to bids. Let's pick number 5. Quantity. What's the difference? Well, it's a required field. Serving 5 entities. I'm going to skip that and come back to it and see if it becomes a little bit more transparent of what that's supposed to be. Like, remember I said this a little awkward sometimes? We're going to look for a 1 gig service at a minimum, and let's say we want 10 gigs at a maximum. Probably not what you do for 5 sites, but we're just putting it. Are you also seeking installation, activation, and initial configuration? Let's say yes, we are. And are you also seeking maintenance and technical support for this service? We'll say yes. We'll add, that's going to tell me a value is required for quantity. And of course, the one person I know, well, she hasn't actually filled out many of these forms.
Excuse me, question from Merced.
Hi, Merced.
What's the difference between this fiber service and the other one, the transport low ISP bundle?
Internet access and transport bundle?
Oh, no. The first one, transport only, no ISP service included. What's the difference between that and this fiber service?
The one that's transport only is a very broad statement, whereas lit fiber is narrowing down specifically what you're looking for. Transport only can be any solution. It doesn't have to just be lit fiber. Yeah, it's data transmission. It can be the T1, the DS3, whatever may be available in your area.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So in quantity, I'm going to put 5 and see if we can move forward. So now that we've added that, we can see our Form 470 is building. There's our first service type. We can add a new service and select internet access only if we want a separate provider. Like many of you get your internet access from your county office. If your county office happens to be a SPIN and they have a charge behind it, you select that internet access only most of the time. Some of them may provide you transport as well. But this is just an example of how we're fitting into that box. You can only select what's in the drop-down menu. If it's not there, you can't manipulate anything. Any questions? Do you guys want to keep moving in this form and see what the rest of it looks like? The USEC website is, they're revamping that website so that they can eventually add a very good explanation for each category. But at this point, it's not there. They do have some videos out that may provide more detail. It's on their Epic. Matter of fact, I'll just navigate back to that. Exactly. In case of doubt, always call. Or you can even, within Epic, create a customer service record and ask them the question so it's documented. But here, anywhere you see the E-rate Productivity Center, you click on that page, you scroll down, this is their entire, all of their, everything they know about the E-rate Productivity Center that they've published is here. You have the PDF user side, navigating. But then you'll notice Epic video tutorials here. The very last one, how to file a FCC Form 470. That can definitely provide you what USAC's vision is on how they want to see the 470 rolled out. So now, let's say, oh, I've got to run, I've got a meeting to get to. Where do I save? It's already saved. As soon as you enter it into the system, it saves. There's no save button. You can actually exit out of the system. Up here, it's saved. Want to see what comes? There's no number. I mean, it does, obviously the form has a number, but you don't have to write it down. You don't have a security code. It's based on your login. If your login has the user rights to create forms, then the user. You can assign multiple users the same rights, and you can share this form. Let me see if it's down at the bottom. Down here it says save and share. Now you can share this form with someone else to either review or finish, depending on how you manage your E-rate. Or you save and continue. But typically, once you start the form, you have to finish it unless you share it with someone. Okay, so we're right at the point of lunchtime. Once we come back, we'll talk about the Form 471 and how to complete it. We'll take about an hour lunch, so about 12:05 or 1:05. We'll reconvene.